Burning fossil fuels is changing our planet, and the heating is rapidly approaching climate limits.
Scientists have made it crystal clear that we need to phase out fossil fuels as quickly as humanly possible, and we're not doing that.
The more the world heats, the more lives are put at risk, and it's becoming increasingly clear that the climate crisis is also a crisis of health.
Medical staff has to be interested. They have to act. They work every day with people who suffer.
You want to do something. You want to do something as doctors.
But now doctors who are standing up are facing profound consequences for their protest.
Where does that leave doctors?
The fact that doctors are losing their license to practice is completely unconscionable.
So how does the doctor's duty of care change as our climate changes? And how can the world draw the links between people and planet's health?
It seems to me that shouting fire when something's on fire should not be a crime.
The battle to curb climate change is being waged across the world and on multiple stages. But I wanted to travel to one of the front lines, the quiet town of St. Gallen in eastern Switzerland, to meet one of the foremost fighters.
I'm Pia Hollenstein. I was working as a nurse, and I'm one of the board members from the beginning on of our case, the Klimaseniorinnen Schweiz.
Klimaseniorinnen Schweiz, or the Climate Senior Women of Switzerland, is an organisation that fights to protect elderly women from the harms of a heating world.
Elderly women are much more affected during heat waves. Working in hospital or in old people's home, like I did, you can see that elderly women, they suffer. Often you see in hospital women do not want to live anymore, and that's really sad. They have bigger problems, they might even die.
In Switzerland, stronger climate policy has failed to get through Parliament time and time again. And so the environmental organisation Greenpeace turned to the courts. Its claimants would be older women, since they're particularly vulnerable to climate change.
So we founded our NGO organisation, Klimaseniorinnen Schweiz, and we sued the government. Because we lost all the initiatives in Switzerland, our last step was to bring it to the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg.
This groundbreaking case would argue that by failing to take tough climate action, Switzerland was impinging on older women's human rights.
The world has never seen a threat to human rights of the scope presented by climate change.
In 2022, the United Nations General Assembly recognised that all people have a right to a healthy environment, since this impacts rights to life, health, food and water, among others. And the Klimaseniorinnen brought their case to Strasbourg, arguing that their rights were specifically being impinged on, since they're especially vulnerable to a heating climate.
We won nearly every point in our case. Switzerland is violating human rights because not doing enough. I cannot tell you how great my joy is about that, because we did a big work for 8 years and now we got more than we expected. I think it's just great.
This decision from the European Court of Human Rights really has implications for every country in Europe, because it means all of those countries can be held accountable to the climate commitments that they have made for the past 30 years.
David is an environmental lawyer and former UN Special Rapporteur on the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment.
This is part of a tidal wave of courts doing their fundamental job of upholding human rights from one of the most profound threats that exists today to those human rights. Climate change, because of wildfires, heat waves, droughts, floods, is having direct and measurable impacts on people's health and well-being. The primary cause of climate change, which is the burning of fossil fuels, is contributing to over 8 million premature deaths in the world every year.
And the world has agreed this needs to change. The Paris Climate Agreement agrees to limit heating to 2 or ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius, a task which would require fossil fuel use to rapidly drop. But despite this consensus, in 2023, global emissions were higher than they'd ever been.
These international environmental treaties have absolutely no mechanisms for accountability or enforcement. That's why people are turning to the courts out of a sense of desperation in an effort to hold governments and businesses accountable to the commitments that they have made for decades and that they have broken time and time again.
And just as courts across the world are drawing the links between climate change, health, and human rights, medical professionals are becoming increasingly aware and active in the fight.
The goals of medicine are basically to try and cure ill health where you can and ameliorate it where you can't. So it's very much within the goals of medicine to try and prevent the health problems of climate change.
Wendy is a medical ethicist and former general practitioner.
So doctors have the knowledge and they have the capacity to act, and they're powerful speakers. So I think they've got knowledge, they've got power and authority, and they've got the responsibility because climate change is a health issue.
Wendy argues that the context of climate change could expand what we consider a doctor's duty of care.
Conventionally, duty of care refers to what a doctor owes to the patient who is in front of them. So you should act purely in the best interests of that patient. We're facing an unprecedented set of circumstances. And at that point, we have to think about caring not only for this patient in front of us with this condition, but also about all those future patients who are going to be affected by climate change.
And an ever-increasing number of medical professionals are reconsidering what care means in a changing climate. Doctors and nurses have been taking to the street to demand tougher climate action.
That sends a very powerful message. It says, okay, this person who knows perhaps more than me about health and healthcare and threats to health, they're taking this really seriously. That's a very important message.
But health professionals in the UK are losing their livelihoods for protesting against the very climate inaction that governments are being successfully sued for. Earlier this year, a retired GP, Sarah Ben, received a custodial sentence relating to peaceful climate protest that breached a civil injunction at Kingsbury Oil Terminal. The General Medical Council responded by suspending her from practice, leading to an outcry from climate activists and health professionals alike.
Here you have a retired GP who is really concerned about a real crisis that is happening around her, who feels helpless and therefore has taken part in peaceful protesting. And then she's being sanctioned by the GMC when there is zero impact of that peaceful protesting on her patients. What message is that sending to doctors, and what message is that sending to patients?
I feel that the actions taken against doctors who engage in non-violent climate protests have been outrageous. First of all, I think the laws are unjust. The laws that criminalise non-violent climate protest are unjust. And second, in terms of professional action against them, the actions that doctors have taken who have been punished in this way have in no way affected their fitness to practice in terms of their knowledge, their competence, their skills, whether or not patients will be safe with them. I find it totally unjustified and totally abhorrent.
So as time goes on and the world continues to heat, how will doctors position themselves in the fight to halt climate change?
There is a very clear movement within the profession to do something.
I guess I'm optimistic that the younger doctors coming through are just looking, well, what kind of planet are we going to live on? And even the small actions can be important because they convey a message.
Not just the youth, also the adults, the doctors, the nurses, they have to do what is needed, and there is protest needed.
The GMC has justified its decision, which they've since repeated, stating that they consider cases which are referred to us and where doctors have broken the law, not their motivations for doing so. It is not the role of regulators to determine UK law. That is a matter for Parliament. But when it comes to protest, many feel that doctors should be able to be climate leaders without the risk of sacrificing their careers.
Instead of criminalizing these doctors and imposing professional sanctions on them, we should actually be giving them awards as heroes for the planet, heroes for public health. These are the kinds of champions who are showing courage and leadership, and we should honor that and not penalize it.